Welcome to World Explained. Today's episode is a counterfactual. What if Russia never invaded Ukraine in 2022? Not what should have happened, and not a moral argument, but a structured way to think about geopolitics by asking how one major event reshaped alliances, economies, and security policy, and what the alternative landscape might look like without it. Before we start, one important rule: counterfactuals can't be proven. We can't rewind history and test outcomes. What we can do is separate facts from assumptions and build a few plausible scenarios based on incentives, trends, and constraints that existed before the war. Here are the confirmed facts that matter for this exercise. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, which became Europe's largest security crisis in decades. In the years that followed, Europe increased defense spending, and NATO expanded to include Finland and Sweden, both of which applied shortly after the invasion. The European Union and partners expanded sanctions and reduced dependence on Russian energy, with the EU stating that its oil import ban covers about 90% of previous Russian oil imports. Now, remove the invasion from the timeline. What changes? The first and most immediate difference would be the pace of European security transformation. Without the shock of 2022, Europe likely still debates defense spending, military readiness, and strategic autonomy, but with less urgency and fewer emergency decisions. This is an assumption, but it follows how democracies typically behave. Defense investments rise fastest when threat perception rises suddenly. In a no-invasion world, many governments probably remain closer to pre-2022 patterns of gradual modernization rather than rapid expansion. This leads to NATO. In real history, Finland and Sweden shifted their security posture after the invasion and entered NATO shortly afterward. In a no-invasion scenario, NATO enlargement to include Finland and Sweden becomes far less certain and likely much slower. It might still happen. Finland and Sweden had long-standing debates about membership, but the political trigger would be weaker. So the alliance map of Northern Europe could look different. More partnership, less full membership, and a less militarized Baltic region. Next, consider Russia's strategic position. Without the invasion, Russia avoids the most severe version of international isolation that followed. That Dawson-T-mean relations with the West are suddenly warm tensions already. Existed before 2022, but the scale of sanctions, the speed of decoupling, and the tone of diplomacy would likely be different. For Russia, that could mean more stable access to markets and technology, less pressure on state revenue, and fewer constraints on trade routes. For Europe, the energy story is one of the biggest differences. The invasion accelerated Europe's push to reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuels. The EU's official sanctions framework includes major energy restrictions and an oil import ban covering around 90% of previous Russian oil imports. Without the invasion, Europe's energy transition still exists, driven by climate policy and market dynamics. But the sudden scramble for substitutes and the rapid policy changes would likely be slower. That could mean fewer short-term price spikes, fewer emergency LNG deals, and a more gradual shift in energy flows. Now, move to the global economy. The real-world war contributed to disruptions in commodity markets, supply chains, and inflation pressures in multiple regions. In the counterfactual world, some of those shocks would likely be smaller or absent. But it's important not to overclaim. Inflation and supply chain stress also came from other factors, including pandemic-era dynamics. So the safe conclusion is that the economic picture is probably less volatile, but not necessarily easy. The next big piece is Ukraine itself. In the no-invasion world, Ukraine continues to face pressure and insecurity because tensions and conflict existed before 2022, but the scale of destruction, displacement, and militarization would be dramatically reduced. This has second-order effects. Ukraine's economy would likely be larger than it is under wartime conditions. Infrastructure investment might be focused on modernization rather than reconstruction, and population displacement would likely be lower. The EU's relationship with Ukraine might still deepen, but at a different pace and with different political debates inside the EU. Now, alliances. One of the defining outcomes of the invasion was the strengthening of Western alignment. Closer coordination between the US, EU, and partners on sanctions, military assistance, and defense industry expansion. In a no-invasion world, that alignment could be looser and more fragmented because there is less pressure to unify quickly. Some countries might prioritize trade and pragmatism with Russia for longer. Others might still pursue a firmer stance, but without the same level of consensus. This also affects defense industry and military procurement. In the real world, European defense spending increased substantially after the invasion, and EU institutions report rising defense expenditures. Without the invasion, procurement programs likely move slower, stockpiles remain thinner, and the defense industrial base expands less aggressively. The long-term effect is a Europe that is still modernizing, but less urgently rearming. Now, consider the broader geopolitical system, the signals sent to other states. In the real world, the war reinforced the idea that major conflict is possible in Europe and that borders can be contested by force. In a no-invasion scenario, that signal is weaker. The international environment might feel more predictable, which affects risk-taking and deterrence calculations globally. This is not a claim that other conflicts vanish, but that the psychological shift in global threat perception is smaller. At this point, it helps to structure the counterfactual into 3 plausible tracks. This isn't about predicting the correct one. It's about mapping the space of outcomes. Track 1. Manage tension. Russia does not invade, but maintains pressure through diplomacy, cyber activity, energy leverage, and limited coercion. Europe responds with gradual diversification and some sanctions, but not a full decoupling. NATO continues to strengthen the eastern flank, but enlargement in the north is slower. Let's flesh this out with real-world parallels. Think of the persistent cyber campaigns targeting Western governments and infrastructure, similar to the attacks on Estonia in 2007, but as a constant low-level hum of disruption. For energy leverage, imagine a scenario where the Nord Stream 2 pipeline becomes an ongoing political battleground, with Russia periodically reducing gas flows to Central Europe to gain diplomatic concessions, reminiscent of the gas disputes of the mid-2000s. Limited coercion might look like Russia conducting more frequent large-scale military exercises on the borders of the Baltic states, or increasing its naval presence in the Black Sea, forcing NATO to react but without crossing the threshold of open conflict. This is a world of constant strategic chess, where every move is calculated to gain an edge without flipping the board. Track 2. Frozen conflict continues. For civilians, this means a painful, grinding reality. Imagine a family in a town near the Donbass line of contact. Their daily life is punctuated by the distant sound of shelling. Their children know the route to the school's bomb shelter by heart. Economic investment is non-existent, and the ever-present threat of escalation hangs over every family decision. This creates a generation of internally displaced people and puts a constant strain on Ukraine's national budget, diverting funds that could have gone to healthcare or education toward maintaining a defensive military posture. It's a state of being neither at war nor at peace. The pre-2022 situation persists. Low-intensity conflict and periodic escalations, but no full-scale invasion. This produces persistent insecurity without the massive shock. Ukraine remains strategically important. The scale of Western support is smaller, and European politics remain more divided on how hard to push back. Track 3. Partial normalization. Tensions remain, but economic ties and diplomacy stabilize somewhat, at least temporarily. Energy trade continues longer. Sanctions are narrower. Defense spending rises modestly, not dramatically. In this world, a Ukrainian software engineer in Kharkiv might collaborate on a project with a German company, feeling a sense of European integration. However, she still reads news of Russian political interference and feels a persistent unease. Meanwhile, a French farmer might protest the continued presence of Russian agricultural products in the market, highlighting the economic tensions that bubble just beneath the surface of this fragile normalization. This scenario is a tightrope walk, where the desire for economic stability constantly clashes with deep-seated political mistrust. This scenario is plausible only if crisis points are managed carefully, because trust was already low. Across all 3 tracks, one idea remains consistent: without the invasion, Europe's security transformation is slower, energy decoupling is slower, and NATO expansion is less certain. Russia is less isolated. Ukraine is less devastated. Global markets face fewer war-driven shocks, but none of this guarantees stability, because the underlying competition and distrust still exist. So is the no-invasion world better? Economically, it is likely less disruptive. Strategically, it might look more stable on the surface. But it could also be more ambiguous, with unresolved tensions and fewer decisive policy shifts. Sometimes major events force systems to adapt quickly. Without them, the same vulnerabilities can persist quietly. The key takeaway is that the invasion didn't just change Ukraine's future. It accelerated changes across Europe. Alliance structures, defense spending, energy policy, and the global perception of risk. A world without the invasion likely has a different map of alliances, a different energy market, and a different pace of militarization, but it still contains strategic competition, its uncertainty, and unresolved security dilemmas. If this video helped you understand the world a little better, give it a like and consider subscribing to World Explained. Your support allows us to keep creating clear and neutral analysis of complex global issues. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.